Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, just how dominant this Timberwolves defense has been. We'll dig into the numbers. I'll explain why no other defense in the league is even close to as good as the Wolves have been so far. We'll look at the NBA.com power rankings. It may surprise you how high John Schumann has the Wolves on his power rankings, and also what the Wolves need to do in Game 2 against the Golden State Warriors Tuesday night. Hard to beat a team twice in a row at their house. What the Wolves might need to do differently this time around to do more than hold serve, play even better this time around. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked on Wolves podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked on Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Tuesday, everybody, and happy Timberwolves game day. The Wolves play tonight against the Golden State Warriors. It's the first half of the Wolves' first back-to-back set this season as they take on the Warriors again in Golden State. We'll talk about that towards the end of the show. I want to open, though, with a bunch of defensive statistics and just how impressive, but adding some context to how dominant, really dominant's the right word, this Wolves defense has been so far. So I want to spend a good chunk of the show on that here today. First of all, though, off the top, a big thank you for making Locked on Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can find Locked on Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked on Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Beecken and also at Locked on T-Wolves. Don't forget the T. Also, a reminder, when you tune in to the Wolves this evening against the Warriors, you can also listen to the show, or listen to the game, on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Of course, the Wolves play the Warriors at, I believe it's 8 p.m. Central Time on Tuesday night. And you can catch every single Anthony Edwards dunk over Dario Saric and or Draymond Green, hopefully both of them, on the hometown broadcast with Alan Horton, the fantastic voice of the Wolves, with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Minnesota Timberwolves and you'll find the game. All right. So the Timberwolves defense, everyone knows it's been the best defense in the league this season. That has been well documented. We've talked about it on the show now for a couple of weeks, really going back to the Miami win, maybe. It's been pretty clear that this team has just been the class of the NBA. We talked about after the game on Monday that this is 5 of the last 6 teams, 5 of the last 6 opponents the Timberwolves have held below 40% field goal shooting. Overall, it's 5 of 9 this season, but they've also held 2 other teams below 41%, 40.2%. I think maybe the Raptors opening night, and then I think Miami was 40%. So of 9 games this season, 7 times they've held an opponent below 41% shooting. Also holding teams under 100 points. That didn't happen against Golden State because of all the offensive rebounds, which we will talk about later too. But holding teams below 100 points, I think 3 or 4 times so far this year. No matter how you want to slice it and dice it with some of the more traditional metrics, it's pretty clear. We've also talked defensive rating, no matter what site you go to for defensive rating. Like, for instance, let's see, Basketball Reference has the Wolves first with a 101.9 defensive rating. NBA.com has the Wolves first with a 102 defensive rating. So in that same neighborhood, right? No matter where you look, easily the Wolves have been the league's best defense in terms of defensive efficiency, which kind of weeds out some of the pace-related stuff. But even if you just look at opponent points per game, which is not the best way to measure how good a defense is, the Wolves are first there. They're best in opponent effective field goal percentage, holding opponents to an effective field goal percentage thus far of only 47.9%. Just across the board, really impressive. But if you drill down a little bit further, I want to list another efficiency number related to the half-court defense specifically, and then also the types of shots that opponents are taking. So let's start with the half-court defense. Overall, as I've said, the Wolves easily have the best overall defense in the league thus far. If you drill down a bit further and you look specifically at half-court defense, The Timberwolves this season are, again, by far the league's best. They are only giving up, per 100 possessions, 82.8 points in the half court per 100 possessions. That's insanity. The next best team is the Clippers at 87.7. That's 4.9 points difference. So we'll call it a 5-point difference in terms of points in the half court per 100 possessions. That's a massive delta, proving just how good the Timberwolves defense has been in the half court this season. Obviously, small sample size caveats apply here. I'm not going to get too hung up on that at this point. For some context, last season, the league's best half court defense for the full 82 game season was the Memphis Grizzlies, and they gave up 93.6 points per play. And this is where the small sample size, or per 100 possessions, I should say. And this is where the small sample size obviously comes in. No, there were, let's see, the next best team last year was 94.9. So there were only two teams that had a better than 95 points per 100 possession in the half court mark last season. Memphis at 93.6 and Cleveland at 94.9. So far this season, the Timberwolves, it's just so crazy. They're like almost 11 points better. What is that? 10.8 points better per 100 possessions in the half court than last year's league best defense. 82.8 points per 100 possessions in the half court. That's a crazy low number. I don't know how else to say that. I think probably the best way to look at it is it's 10.8 points better than last year's best half court defense. In transition, things aren't nearly as good. We know that. It's still not maybe as bad as I would have expected, right? The Wolves are 19th in points per possession, points per 100 possessions in transition. Well, actually, this is the way that this is measured out, is points added per 100 possessions based on transition. By the way, this is cleaningtheglass.com. I'm using Cleaning the Glass for these numbers. And Minnesota's 19th there, 20th in points per play in transition. That's essentially an efficiency measure. So it's not rock bottom, but it's in the bottom half of the league. But the half-court defense is so incredibly, and I keep using the word dominant, I think that's legit the best way to describe the Wolves' half-court defense. And defense in general this year is dominant. I don't think that it's certainly not overselling it. Again, through 9 games, it's not overselling it. So the number one half-court defense by far. A side note, I've mentioned this quite a bit over the offseason. Yes, the Wolves had the number 10 defense last year in terms of defensive rating. They were much better in the half court last year than they were in transition. That was really obvious. And they finished last season 7th in terms of half court efficiency. This year, again, still number 1. Now, how are they doing it? Obviously, the length of Rudy Gobert, he's playing a lot more of the kind of free safety, the roamer type role, right? Where he's guarding a lower usage type guy. Against Golden State Sunday, it was mostly Draymond. You can let Draymond Green roam. Yeah, he's a good passer. Got that. But like leave him wide open, dare him to shoot, get under his skin, all that good stuff. That's an added benefit, right? And then Gobert can kind of roam free. And we saw how petrified everybody with the ball in their hands with the Golden State Warriors that was considering going into the paint was of Rudy Gobert. Because again, this is 2019 Rudy Gobert, 2020 Rudy Gobert. This isn't last year's Rudy Gobert. So that is obviously a huge piece of it. We know the on-ball prowess of Mike Conley, Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, and Karl-Anthony Towns playing hard. I spent a lot of time talking about that in the post-game pod Monday. Cat running through screens, just kind of chasing guys everywhere, like doing what he can to really muck things up for the opposing offense and just play hard. And that's not necessarily always been an issue for Cat, but at times defensively it has been. And just playing hard and knowing what you're supposed to be doing. And Cat's been jerked around quite a bit, in a lot of ways in terms of head coaches, front offices, personnel, etc., roles, but also defensive schemes as a member of the Timberwolves over the past 7-8 years. And now he has a very clear role, and he's playing that to a T. In terms of the types of shots opponents are taking, that's the other thing. To me, it's kind of the anatomy of how this defense was put together. So in terms of the types of shots opponents are taking, Minnesota is 4th in terms of opponent. How's the best way to say this? The lowest rate of corner 3-point attempts by an opponent. They're 4th league wide. Only 7.2% of opponent 3-point attempts are coming from the corners. 7.2%. the percentage of non-corner threes is 29.1%. That's really, really, really good. Because, well, opponent three-point percentage can be a little bit fluky and a little bit fickle. I don't like to hang my hat on that too much. For what it's worth right now, opponents are shooting only 31.3% from outside the arc against the Wolves this season. That's the league's best mark. That is a little bit fluky. It can be, right? Teams can just have off nights. But the type of shots that you're allowing, that can be at least somewhat controlled by your defense. The Wolves are funneling, or they're closing out to corners so well, and they're funneling everything to the middle of the floor where Rudy Gobert can be the most dominant. And they're using the length of Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards, primarily also Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and to a lesser extent, Kyle Anderson, to funnel things to the middle of the floor. It's working very, very well. So they're fourth in corner three-point, not corner three-point percentage, but frequency of corner three-point attempts in terms of their defense. They're also fourth in rim attempts. Only 27% of opponent shot attempts are coming at the rim. That's the fourth best mark in the league, behind only Sacramento, Boston, and Golden State. That Sacramento number really surprises me. And also, all the mid-range numbers are huge. Opponents are attempting a ton of shots from the mid-range against the Wolves. Fourth most in terms of short mid-range shots, which are 4 to 14 feet, according to Cleaning the Glass. 14 feet to the three-point line, they're third. That's a good thing, right? So if you look on Cleaning the Glass, it's actually in blue because they allow a ton of them. That's a good thing. So in terms of all mid-range shots from 4 feet to the arc, so everything between 4 feet and the three-point arc, the Wolves are third in allowing a high frequency, a third in terms of frequency of mid-range shots. I'm struggling with the best way to say this, but I think you know what I'm saying here. More than 36% of opponent shot attempts are coming from between 4 feet and the three-point arc. That is a very, very, very good thing, and it's going to lead to a really sustainable and fantastic defense throughout the season if they can continue to do this. I want to summarize this, put a bow on that, and then I want to talk a little bit about the NBA.com power rankings and John Schumann, what he said over at NBA.com about the Wolves on Monday. We'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Ibotta. Hey, how does free Thanksgiving sound? This year, Ibotta is here to give you cash back and help make sure that your Thanksgiving table is complete. Because who wants turkey without the gravy? Starting this November, or like right now, this month, for the fourth year in a row, Ibotta is giving 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast. Just add the offers in the app to redeem for everything you need to make your Thanksgiving feast complete. All you have to do is shop at your favorite retailers and upload your receipt. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Other apps give you points that don't really amount to much at all. But with Ibotta, you get real cash back that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. You can also start earning cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too when you start with Ibotta, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Download the Ibotta app now and use the code LOCKED to get 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving dinner starting right now. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use the code LOCKED. Again, that's Ibotta, Ibotta, in the Google Play or App Store, and use the code LOCKED. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, everydayers, Wednesday's show will be the post-game pod. There's a live postcast tonight on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel with Luke Inman and I believe Jack Borman from Kane Supis, the editor over there. And then I'll have the post-game pod for you Wednesday morning. We'll have another post-game pod Thursday as the Wolves play in Phoenix Wednesday night. A packed week, and of course, we're with you here Monday through Friday, plus postcasts. They're live on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. I will post the audio here at the Locked On Wolves feed. So if you miss it, if you don't watch it live after the game, you can hear it the next day, and then you can also listen to this show, the post-game pod as well, the morning after all Monday through Thursday shows. So again, shows Monday through Friday. All right. Putting a bow on the defensive numbers that I talked about first segment, I want to kind of summarize these more concisely because I realized it got a little, as I was explaining the percentages, it may have gotten a little convoluted. Still the league's best defense in terms of defensive rating, defensive efficiency, opponent effective field goal percentage, no matter how you want to slice it. By far the league's best half-court defense It's 10.8 points better per 100 possessions. Half court specifically, isolating half court, taking out transition. 10.8 points better than last year's number 1 defense. Wolves are easily number 1, almost 5 points better than the number 2 defense in terms of half court efficiency this season. And type of shots that they're allowing. Also, obviously a huge part of this. They are 4th best in terms of the percentage of corner 3-point attempts allowed, 4th best in terms of percentage of rim attempts allowed by opponents. And they are in the top 3 or 4, depending on which category you look at, in terms of number of mid-range shots allowed. So they're allowing lots of mid-range shots, very little at the rim, very little in the corners. That's a recipe for a lockdown defense. You have Rudy Gobert roaming that back line. You're going to block a lot of shots. You're going to affect a lot of shots with Rudy Gobert roaming underneath the basket and patrolling the paint, if you will. It all adds up to a fearsome defense. There's no question about it. And by the way, these are numbers. These are all things we'll kind of keep an eye on over at Cleaning the Glass and at Basketball Reference. And also we'll pull some stuff from B-Ball Index as the season goes on. But no matter how you slice and dice the numbers, it all backs up what we've all seen with our eyes, which is Jaden McDaniels is unbelievable. Anthony Edwards is locked in. Mike Conley looks exactly like what we've all expected to see from Mike Conley, especially in the defensive end of the floor. Been very, very consistent. Karl-Anthony Towns is playing better than many people expected, and Rudy Gobert is playing much better than he did last season. And the bench, too. I haven't talked about Nickeil Alexander-Walker hardly at all today. It was one of the call-outs I made on the post-game pod Monday after Sunday night's win in Golden State. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has turned in 3 straight really strong games, going back to last Wednesday night, the win over New Orleans, played really well in the win on Friday night against San Antonio, and then again Sunday against Golden State. He's on a really, really strong stretch and is playing a lot like a light version of Jaden McDaniels right now. So he's a big part of this too. It's because the Wolves can always have 2 of the 3 of Alexander Walker, Jaden McDaniels, and Anthony Edwards on the floor. Almost all the time, they've got 2 of 3. And that's made a huge difference for the Wolves to have all 3 of those guys kind of rotating in and out of the lineup. And just the length is so unbelievable. All right, let's talk about the NBA.com power rankings, which if you've listened to the show, we haven't talked about this since probably maybe August, I guess, whenever the first one of these would have come out. I don't do power rankings a lot on the show because most of it's just noise and it's just, content for content's sake, clicks for clicks' sake, if you will, or content for the sake of clicks, not super thoughtful. The NBA.com power rankings, though, however, are fantastic. John Schumann does an awesome job and digs in really deep. I'm always amazed when I'm reading the, couple 300-400 words he writes about every team at just how in-depth he is on all 30 teams. It's pretty incredible. So the Timberwolves this last week were 7th in his power rankings. They shot all the way up to number 2 in his power rankings this week. Or I should say, I think they were 9th, actually. They shot up 7 spots. I think I read that wrong. So they're number 2 behind only the Philadelphia 76ers, who are 8-1, or were 8-1 as of John's publishing of this. Denver, by the way, is number 3, and Boston's number 4. The Wolves have already beaten Denver and Boston. And oh, by the way, Golden State's number 7. The Wolves have beaten them once. Miami's number 9. Obviously, the Wolves beat them sans Jimmy Butler. But they've beaten 4 teams in the top 9 in John Schumann's power rankings and 2 in the top 4. Of course, they're one of the ones in the top 4. So a couple of things he's got here. He notes their defensive rating. He does this every week. So it's a good way to kind of track all this. Their defensive rating's number 1. Their offensive rating's number 16. Their net rating's number 4. Their pace is actually pretty middle of the pack. He's got them at 20. I think Basketball Reference has them at like 16 or something. So pace can vary a little bit depending on which site you look at. Actually, they've got them 14th. So varies quite a bit, actually. 20th in pace, according to NBA.com, 14th in pace, according to Basketball Reference. And then he goes on to say what I basically just summarized. He says the Wolves might have the league's most impressive resume. They have its 4th best record, 3rd best point differential, the number 1 defense, and the most wins against the 14 teams that are currently over 500. They're 4-1 against the 14 teams over 500. 2 of the 4 wins have come against the teams that would probably be the favorites to win the finals, to reach the finals at this point, in the Nuggets and Celtics. He goes on to talk actually a little bit, and I swear I looked this up before I looked at the power rankings. He talks about limited corner 3-pointers, and only 21% of their opponents' attempts have come from the corners, which is the best mark of any team in the league. They also rank first in opponent field goal percentage in the paint. And the percentage of their opponent shots that have come in the paint is the league's sixth lowest opponent rate. That's a little bit different than the number I pulled from Cleaning the Glass. But again, the sentiment is the same. He talks about the offense and Karl-Anthony Towns coming around. And then he says the schedule is friendly and that the Wolves have just one rest disadvantage game along with 10 rest advantage games in the first weeks of the season. And it happens to be this Wednesday in Phoenix, the night after the Golden State game on Tuesday, which is, by the way, if you're into the in-season tournament thing, which I guess we all kind of have to be on some level, the Wolves and Warriors, they're each 1-0 in the in-season tournament, and they're fighting to see who remains unbeaten in West Group C on Tuesday night. And it'll be maybe a little bit of different vibes, especially after the Chris Paul, Mike Conley thing, which you might have seen on Twitter. John Krasinski of The Athletic was talking about how the Wolves were quietly quietly upset by, I forget the word he used, but basically they were upset about it quietly in the locker room after seeing what Paul did to Mike Conley. I talked about it a little bit on Monday's show. I got in a mini Chris Paul soapbox. If you missed it, start of the third segment, go back, check it out. I also didn't appreciate that he was the one that called the technical on Anthony Edwards, and the official obliged and then called the tech on Ant. I digress. But the Tuesday game may have a little bit more to it because of the Chris Paul thing, because of the Draymond Ant thing, maybe the Nas Kuminga thing. We'll see. So all that to say, it's an in-season tournament game Tuesday. We'll see how these two teams kind of feel each other out in game two in just 48 hours, or 48 hours between games, I guess. And that'll be pretty interesting. All right. Let's close the show by talking about a few keys against the Warriors. Game two, again, of this weird, like, not even home and home, but 2 games in Golden State mini series the Wolves have. We'll talk about keys to Tuesday's game here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action than mid-November. We are, 2/3 of the way through the NFL season, almost. Just a couple weeks left in the college football season. We've still got, of course, early season NHL, early season NBA, the start of college basketball really kind of in earnest this week. The Gophers, by the way, are 2-0 as of now. I think they play next maybe Tuesday night, tonight. So a great time of year to get involved. And, of course, go check out the line for the Wolves-Warriors game. It's currently off the board, by the way. We'll talk about this, but Steph Curry's listed as questionable as I'm recording this with a knee injury. So FanDuel actually, I believe, had the Wolves as 3.5-point underdogs on Tuesday, but now it's off the board because of the Steph thing. So go check that out on FanDuel. Keep an eye on it. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, let's close this thing out with a few keys related to the Timberwolves game against the Warriors on Tuesday night. And, of course, the big story early in the game, outside of the turnovers for the Wolves, was the defensive rebounding issues. And I talked in the postgame pod. There was some flukiness there. I'm the first one to complain about defensive rebounding. I did it all last season. I did it all off season. It's been the biggest issue for this team for years. And sitting here right now, they're actually still, 6th league wide in defensive rebound rate. A number I didn't reference earlier, if you kind of slice and dice those cleaning the glass numbers a little bit, is another way to look at defensive rebounding. Cleaning the Glass has offensive rebound percentage for defenses, what they define as the percentage of opponent misses that the opponent rebounded. And they have the Wolves at 14th in opponent offensive rebound rate at 27.1%, which is not, as it turns out, a good mark. So it's been an issue for the Wolves. It clearly was an issue against Golden State. They finished by allowing, I can't remember, I think 19 offensive rebounds to Golden State, which is just insanity. And it was the only reason, really, that Golden State was in this game at halftime, because they were shooting the ball so terribly. The Wolves have to rebound better defensively. There's no question about it. Anthony Edwards was decent on the glass. Mike Conley had a couple of big rebounds. They need guards to help out Rudy and Cat. Cat was very good on the glass overall in this game. In fact, early in the game, he was like the only guy grabbing rebounds for Minnesota. Both Cat and Rudy ended up with double-doubles in this game. But the Wolves need guards and wings to rebound. And that's going to be key, whether or not Steph Curry plays, right? Like, and also you can't count on Golden State shooting the ball as poorly, so there could be less potential rebounds available. But the Wolves just have to grab the ones that are out there, and they can't let that be the reason that they lose a game that they should win. And that's the only reason this thing was even relatively close on Sunday. Exploiting the mismatch on offense. That's another really important thing. It's always important, but Golden State tried to guard Jaden McDaniels with Steph Curry to start the game on Sunday, and Jaden scored in the post, backed him down, dropped him off at the rim on the Wolves' very first possession. And then at times the Wolves did a good job of that. Naz Reid's very good at exploiting mismatches. We saw Kat take Dario Saric one-on-one several times. The Wolves did a good job with it, but not so coincidentally, around the possessions in which they didn't, and the ball got sticky, the offense got stagnant, a lot of ball watching, that sort of thing. That's when this offense ground to a halt. And it's not that there weren't mismatches to be had. It's that they allowed themselves to become stagnant in the half court. And if you move the ball, you find the mismatch, and that's not to say you force it, right? Like Rudy Gobert a couple of times the Wolves tried to force feed Rudy Gobert. We saw that not work well at all last season. There were some instances of that, but I think in general, if you start there and then work off of that, the Wolves are going to have success offensively. And that was something they did well, again, for most of the game on Sunday, but they need to do it more consistently this time around against Golden State. The last thing would be defensively, play the exact same way that you did on Sunday. Of course, defensive rebounding notwithstanding, that's got to be better. Also defend without fouling. Minnesota did an outstanding job of defending without fouling for the vast majority of the game. Golden State got into the penalty a little past the midway point in the third quarter and early in the fourth quarter, after the Wolves were super good in the first half at not fouling. And it allowed Golden State to hang around in that kind of 10 to 14 point deficit range. And that's what, gave us all heartburn at the end of the game when Chris Finch pulled the starters and Golden State hit a couple of threes and the Wolves missed some free throws. But that kind of started with the Wolves getting themselves into the penalty very quickly. Jaden McDaniels had 3 quick fouls trying to guard Chris Paul, trying to guard Steph Curry. Just be smart. And I worry about Jaden getting into foul trouble early in a game like this, because it is such a tough defensive assignment. And I know if you just look at the box score, it's like, Steph put up 38. How could you possibly say it was a good defensive performance? Go back and listen to the post-game pod if you missed it. But the cliff notes there are, hey, it took him 25 shots to do it. And also, by the way, he turned it over 5 times and only had 3 assists. This was a good defensive performance for the Wolves. Do the same thing this time around. You can't count on Klay shooting 3 of 10 from outside the arc or 5 of 16 from the field. You can't count on Steph turning it over 5 times. But if you play the same way, you at least give yourselves a fighting chance to force that issue, right? There's still that opportunity. You have to give the opponent the opportunity to mess up in that way, to turn it over a bunch, to take contested tough shots. And if they make him, you tip your cap. And Steph might make him. He's a Hall of Famer, right? Klay might make him. He's one of the better shooters of all time. But you have to put yourselves in the position to give them the opportunity to miss difficult shots, to turn the ball over, etc. And in general, I think the Wolves did a really good job of that the other day on Sunday. They've got to do it again this time around. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, there will be a live postcast on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. If you have not subscribed, go do that now. And then you can also listen to the audio after the fact here at the Locked On Wolves audio feed, wherever you listen to podcasts. This podcast will have another episode tomorrow morning, Wednesday morning. It'll be the post-game pod. We'll break down the game, individual studs and duds, what I liked, what I didn't like, key takeaways from Wolves Warriors, part 2. In-season tournament game 2 for the Wolves as well in West Pool Play C. So we'll talk about all that on Wednesday's show. And then, of course, do the same thing. We'll briefly look ahead to Phoenix on Wednesday night, too, as part of that show. So tons to get to. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find this show. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken. That's with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.